Dear conference participants, we continue our international scientific conference with participation of distinguished professors and doctors. I hope I will listen more energized speakers and participants after the lunch break. Their role in terms of maintaining interactivity of our event, we're ready for your questions and interventions. So, dear speakers, we can continue our discussions on colonial ideologies. The first floor is Professor Oskalel, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Once again, I used to work for a politician, a president, as a matter of fact, and in Cyprus. And he used to tell me that the worst speech that comes after the lunch. So that is the way it is. But I'll try to grab the attention. I once again need a volunteer from the participants, please. I need a volunteer, please. Just for a simple question. Anyone? Anyone? Just a very simple question. I'll simply ask, what is 1 plus 1? In math, it is 2. In politics, the colonial politics, it is at least 3. Let me do the post-colonial math for you, all right, if I may, all right? Yeah, it is really interesting. Now, think in terms of you are watching TV with 2 actors. How many people are there actually? 2 actors and the camera. Right? There is a camera, and the position of the camera determines not only what we're not only talking about montage, but what film theory calls decoupage, right? It is where you locate the camera, changes what you see from bottom, from top, from distance, larger pane, and so on and so forth. So when we talk about the science of decolonization, now we face a problem which is also the solution, which is also the problem. It is called the science. Because when we do academic work, we usually assume the third person omniscient talking. It is an authorial voice dictating what we need to know. When you read a book, whose voice do you hear? You hear your own voice, right? But what you hear, are they the thoughts that belong to you? No. It is what the book is writing. So practically, book hijacks your own thoughts and turns you into a certain automaton, thinks for you and tells you what you need to know. Now,
we have chance to analyze during reading, yeah?
Yes. But here's the thing. Even the analytical, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And this is actually, this is the very end. I think that you got all my storm right now. This is where this is where I would like to get. And like that requires consciousness, though. You need to be able to hear your own voice. You need to kind of pay attention where the authorial voice ends and when your own voice begins. And what is really interesting to me, especially in the legal framework, now our very distinguished professor mentioned that when you are dealing with a victim versus a perpetrator, this is not a dialogue. When you are dealing with French, what they did in Algeria, in Haiti, in elsewhere, this is a very difficult conversation. Worse yet, who is the third person? That's 1 plus 1. Who is the third person? Whose law, whose norms that we adopt to solve the problem? International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice. These were created not to protect the victim, but said to say, most of the time, most of the case, give political immunity through legal system to the perpetrator. So, in many ways that we had seen, for instance, the Minsk group. Sometimes I ask my students, and they naively say that Minsk group failed. And I said, no, they exactly did. Accomplished their mandate of protecting the occupier, the perpetrator. Therefore, I think when we invoke the legal system, and this is kind of the dilemma, and I try to create for the floor the twofold of this, the same dilemma, almost the two sides of the same coin. Our distinguished members of the parliament actually raised this question. On the one hand, we need science, scientific evidence as support. We need statistics, how many women are killed, domestic violence, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, all this scientific evidence is actually used against us. And I try to invoke Mr. President's, His Excellency Ilham Aliyev's speech delivered during COP29. And that was so important as far as I am concerned for the following reason. Because he spoke to the faces of those who try to weaponize environment against the colonized. That happened with human rights. That always happens with democracy. Democracy has all of a sudden became, at the end of history, the democracy, not a democracy. The democracy dictated by the old colonial powers. So when you try to measure yourself up with the democratic republican rules, you must embrace the colonial yoke in the mirror of the colonist. Therefore, this is the scientific part. And the second part is the legal part. On the one hand, we need justice. We seek justice. But who is justice? Who is law? Who is norms that we are invoking to solve the problems? We still need the French justice to punish the French perpetrators. And guess what? Guess what? The French justice system would not punish them. The French system, as the French scientist who found no correlation between cancer and nuclear test, scientifically, bad science, the justice system would give immunity. And this is worse, because when you know that you are dealing with people like Rhodos or Kipling, they were without shame colonists. But when we face 21st century, now the colonists disguises themselves in the best attire of democratic NGO, the helper of the human rights, women rights, gay rights. Yet the truth is that they are nothing but state agents. Very dangerously, because this time they come in disguise. We are more vulnerable unless we hear our own voice. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. It was so impressive. Thank you for your insightful thoughts. Do you have any additional comments? Professor Benafri, please, and after Professor Gonchor.
Okay. Merci infiniment, Monsieur le Président, et merci aussi, Professeur Mourad, pour ces excellentes observations et approches concernant la décolonisation. Moi, je voulais, si vous voulez, mettre en relief quelques propositions, peut-être des recommandations. Vous savez qu'actuellement, lorsqu'on commence à parler sur le fait colonial, dans les pays du Sud global, en Asie, en Afrique, en Amérique latine, il paraît qu'on est en train de faire une étude de cette mémoire coloniale d'une manière limitée, nationale ou même tribale. La question qui se pose, peut-on penser par une plateforme de recherche que l'initiative Bakou a proposée dans ce papier, de penser comme un médecin? Aujourd'hui, on a fait le diagnostic. Et combien de fois on a fait le diagnostic de la colonisation, décolonisation? Est-ce que n'est pas maintenant le temps de penser à travailler ensemble, croiser les expériences, les mémoires, afin de pouvoir voir le tableau colonial dans son totalité, afin de travailler ensemble et arriver avec des résultats? Ça veut dire quoi? On a 3 étapes à faire. La première, c'est quel diagnostic? Deuxièmement, avec quelle méthode? Et quand je dis quelle méthode, ça veut dire il y a le travail des anthropologues, des historiens, tous les domaines des sciences sociales et humaines, et même, je dirais, inclure l'IA, l'intelligence artificielle peut-être, qui va nous aider à savoir comment travailler sur cette mémoire coloniale pour arriver aux résultats. Et ces résultats qui sont en général arriver à faire la thérapie des peuples, comme je vous ai expliqué. Cette maladie qui nous a touchés, nous, ensemble, les pays du Sud, comment peut-on arriver à faire une thérapie proposée à ces peuples, peut-être à petite échelle, grande échelle, une thérapie qui peut un petit peu arriver à nous donner cette sensation, qui sommes-nous? Avoir cette sensation de comprendre à la fin notre histoire et la regarder en face. Parce qu'il y a un subconscient de la mémoire coloniale qu'on n'arrive pas à expliquer maintenant avec les mots. Donc il faut des experts dans les sciences sociales et humaines pour qu'on puisse arriver à cet résultat serein où on peut nous accepter et voir cet héritage colonial douloureux sans rumeur. D'autres choses. Je pense aussi qu'il est important de renforcer la coopération sud-sud. Saviez-vous que, par exemple, pour le pays du Maghreb, les échanges, à ce jour, ils se font d'une manière verticale. Ça veut dire Maghreb avec la France et l'Europe, qui accapare plus ou moins 80% de nos échanges. Il y a uniquement 4% des échanges d'une manière horizontale. Donc il est temps que nous, les pays du Sud, de travailler sur cette coopération entre nous et partager nos expériences dans tous les domaines. Parce que je pense, et je suis convaincu, qu'on a la possibilité de proposer au monde d'autres échelles de valeurs sur ces droits de l'homme, sur la liberté, sur la colonisation. À ce jour, malheureusement, ces droits de l'homme, sur la liberté et la démocratie que les pays, les puissances du monde nous bombardent matin et soir, et on voit constamment comment ces valeurs n'ont plus cet consensus universel. Donc il est temps que nous aussi, nous devons peut-être penser à des valeurs où les méthodes ou les valeurs de ces valeurs proposées sont réellement universelles pour tout le monde, pour tout l'être humain. Donc je pense que sont les 2 points que je voulais mettre à l'évidence, et je vous remercie.
Thank you. Please, Professor Gonchor.
Yeah, just a short comment also to Professor Murat's speech. I myself also have been very impressed by President Aliyev's intervention at the COP29. That was such a wonderful moment in the history of advocacy for decolonization, so I totally share that. I just wanted to comment on your point about whose laws, right, and what justice system, and I mean, just to give a few anecdotes that have always been bothering me. One about the international system. We all know there are certain people now on that list, on that wanted list, referring to two currently ongoing conflicts. Don't want to mention the names here, but then what about the people who did these wars of aggression against Yugoslavia in 1999, who did the aggression against Iraq in 2003, who did the aggression against Libya in 2011? So how come these leaders are not? They should have been on the wanted list long before those two that are currently on that wanted list, right? So that's obviously an evidence of this International Criminal Court acting in the interest of, or mainly in the interest of Western imperial powers. In terms of the French internal justice system, again, there's such a perfect anecdote that fits what you're saying. In French Polynesia, there's a person I haven't mentioned yet, Gaston Floss, who was actually the kind of after Povana's arrest and imprisonment, and quite some time, but he was kind of essentially within the territorial level of French Polynesia. He became kind of that France-Afrique type puppet by the French, right? He was the one who was a local Tahitian mixed, half French, half Tahitian leader. And he was very corrupt and very power hungry and all kind of things. And France put him there essentially to defend nuclear testing, to create a kind of semblance of democracy locally. And he was involved in so many corruption affairs. And as long as he was actually siding with French national interest, he was untouchable. He was never, even if some prosecutors who were independently thinking tried to prosecute him, they had always failed. The second, in 2007, he changed. I mean, I guess we can call him an opportunist, but he changed his position. He became a supporter of independence, and put his lot someplace else. Joined Oscar Temaro, at least for some time, and it's pretty much like the month after he had changed his attitude, the French justice system went after him for all these corruption affairs that he had previously done, essentially by order of Chirac and others. And now he's in his 90s. He can never run for office again because he convicted several times. So that's a perfect example of how that French system, this French justice system, that's supposedly independent and democratic and rule of law, blah blah blah blah, all these Western liberal kind of rhetorics. Is absolutely working as an enforcer of colonial systems and to crack down on those who fight against it, and to protect those the worst crooks, if they are in line with the French colonial system. So yeah, I just wanted to bring these examples to the forefront. So.
Please, Mr. Daoud.
Alors, je voudrais ajouter quelques recommandations. Je voudrais ajouter des recommandations concernant les trois côtés. Le premier côté, c'est le côté méthodologique. Le deuxième côté théorique. Et le troisième, c'est le côté pratique d'action. Pour le côté méthodologique, je voudrais bien parler le problème des concepts. C'est-à-dire que, comme disait le penseur algérien qui est maintenant mort, c'est Mouloud Belkacem, Naït Belkacem, qui disait dans les années 80 qu'il ne fallait pas utiliser le mot colonialisme, parce que coloniser, ça veut dire quelque chose de positif dans la langue française, mais il faut utiliser d'autres mots qui décrivent bien la réalité. Ça veut dire par exemple destruction, phénomène de destruction, plus ce n'est pas un phénomène de colonisation. Aussi, je vous raconte juste une petite anecdote, c'est que ça fait quelques années, quand par exemple les étudiants de PhD soutiennent leur thèse, quand ils écrivent par exemple le titre, par exemple avec une question, on leur dit c'est faux. C'est faux, il ne faut pas écrire le titre avec une question. Maintenant, dernièrement, on accepte cette proposition et il y a beaucoup d'étudiants qui utilisent le style de question même dans le titre lui-même. Cela montre bien cette influence méthodologique, même des fois dans nos pratiques au sein même à l'université. Le deuxième aspect, c'est l'aspect théorique. Je voudrais parler de quelque chose qui est très proche de ce qu'on est en train de parler depuis le matin. C'est par exemple le mouvement de négritude. Le mouvement de négritude qui a été annoncé en Afrique. C'est avec Frantz Fanon, Aimé Césaire, qui vraiment dénonçait cette tragédie coloniale française en parlant aussi de cette discrimination entre les Noirs et les Blancs. Et je pense que la France a bien utilisé cette différence à son profit. Je pense aussi le mouvement de négritude, il est parmi les mouvements les plus forts qui dénoncent bien sûr les éléments qui ont été utilisés par la France pour faire ce clivage et divergence au sein des sociétés. Aussi, on parle des études postcoloniales. Les études postcoloniales, comme par exemple la question de gender, c'est une question qui est très, très posée. Le rôle des femmes, c'est très important. En plus, il y a la question de cette femme qui travaille au Parlement, qui était sur le développement durable. La question de développement durable, c'est une question très centrale. Elle rentre dans nos soucis par rapport à la question de décolonisation. Parce que le monde au nord, les pays développés, ils ont la technologie. Maintenant, ils pensent aux énergies propres, alors que les pays du Sud, ils n'ont pas commencé leur take-off. Ils ne sont pas encore décollés. Donc, ils sont maintenant, ils doivent respecter certains normes par rapport à l'énergie propre, alors ils n'ont même pas commencé leur développement industriel. Donc, cela pose un réel problème pour les pays du Sud. Il faut ouvrir un dialogue entre les pays développés et les pays du Sud concernant la question de développement durable. Quelle est la priorité pour les pays du Sud? Est-ce que c'est rentrer déjà dans l'industrie, l'industrialisation, acquérir de la technologie? Et après, on parle bien sûr de la question de l'énergie propre. Dernière question, dernier propos, c'est par rapport à l'action. Je voudrais bien que, par exemple, l'initiative de Bakou devienne un groupe de pression. Un groupe de pression. Il faut essayer de s'introduire dans les institutions internationales pour faire du lobbying. C'est très important. Ce n'est pas les discours, l'analyse, la compréhension, c'est très important. Mais entrer dans des institutions, faire du lobbying, je pense que c'est l'achèvement de tout cet effort. Merci.
Thank you for your remarks. I totally agree. The Baku Initiative Group is a key driver of fair struggles against colonialism. And our next speaker is Dr. Corbin. Please, you have additional remark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to return to the question of what constitutes decolonization. We point to the long-standing legislative authority contained in international instruments as key to this question. These instruments include the United Nations Charter, Human Rights Conventions, United Nations resolutions, and other international instruments adopted by the United Nations and other international organizations, which serve to refine the required measurement in determining whether the threshold of full self-government is met in any decolonization process or processes that suggest that they're being decolonized. The issue, of course, whether political developments or judicial decisions of the administering power can affect the arrangement, and whether that arrangement is then mitigated by those factors. There is also the issue of whether the threshold of full self-government has been met under the various political status arrangements that often are below the required minimum standards for full self-government. So there are degrees of colonialism. And we find that in some instances, those colonial systems meet some standards but not the full measure. What we have done in the Dependency Studies project is to synthesize these relevant international instruments, and this has resulted in the formulation of self-governance indicators. These first introduced, as I mentioned earlier today, in 2011 at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies of the University of the West Indies, and is published in the edited volume on the non-independent territories of the Caribbean and Pacific. It was published by the Institute of Commonwealth Studies in 2012. In this regard, these self-governance indicators are designed as a diagnostic tool to independently assess the existing dependency arrangements to determine the level of compliance with these minimum standards that have been established. If so often these arrangements are projected as self-government. It also examines the question of whether territories have achieved the full preparation for self-government. Article 73B of the United Nations Charter requires that countries that administer territories advance those territories to the full measure of self-government. Well, the indicators assess whether or not that preparation has been completed, or whether it has been delegated, and at what point those powers are actually transferred, which is a requirement of the Decolonization Declaration of 1960. Now, the self-governance indicators are applied through a process of self-governance assessment to examine the sufficiency of these models. Several versions of the indicators are utilized in this process, depending on the specific governance model on the evaluation. There is a model for non-self-governing territories that, in fact, are on the United Nations list of 17 current territories, mostly with respect to small island territories in the Caribbean and Pacific. And these indicators, this set of indicators examines the question of whether they have been prepared for self-government and identifies the areas in which further preparation is necessary, recognizing the fact that the issue of decolonization after 1945, signing of the United Nations Charter, became a preparatory function. It was not simply maintaining territories in perpetuity, but rather the preparatory function began at that time. So we look at that one set of indicators which deals with that question. The second set of indicators deals with those territories which are projected as autonomous. In many cases, in fact, this was the case with French Polynesia. They were, after 1947, were projected as autonomous because the name of the territory was changed from colony to territory. Did not change the power relationship between the French and the territory itself, but the name was changed, and therefore that was sufficient at that time for the territory to be removed, along with the other territories under French administration. Subsequently, of course, as we know, French Polynesia in 2013 and Kanaki, New Caledonia in 1986 were placed back on the United Nations list because of a similar review process that the United Nations undertook at that time. In fact, the self-governance assessment of the French Polynesia was done in 2012 that informed the United Nations with respect to the providing the rationale for their reinscription on the United Nations list. There are other territories that also had undergone self-governance assessment as well. Curaçao, which is a territory of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, also underwent a self-governance assessment in the early stages, so something in 2012 as well. Most recently, Bonaire, which is another Dutch territory, also underwent an assessment. Now, the assessments for Bonaire was different because the Bonaire assessment was related to the question of their integration. Their status changed in 2010, so they were then projected as being integrated into the Kingdom of the Netherlands. In fact, integrated into one country of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, that country being Holland. The question then, therefore, was whether or not they met the international minimum standard for integration, or whether it was partial integration. The assessment determined that it was, in fact, partial integration. And we are aware, of course, that there's an opportunity at this moment much work is being done to try to have Bonaire placed back on the United Nations list. The other self-governance assessments have been done for the non-self-governing territories on the list. In the Caribbean, it's the British Virgin Islands, Bermuda, and also in the Pacific, Guam and Norfolk Island. So we have a mechanism that has been in place for over a decade, and it is something that's very useful. A number of other territories, in fact, including the French territories in the Caribbean, have been interested in having an assessment done. It is an important tool, I believe, in determining the actual reality of these arrangements, which are often projected as self-government, but in actuality, they're significantly deficient. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Corbin, for comprehensive information. We have two more comments by Lawrence and June. Please, Lawrence.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Dr. Carlyle, for your speech. I just wanted to comment on that. One other aspect, that because I'm bilingual and I operate kind of in both the French and the English, it is quite interesting and I think quite ingenious in a way how France has actually used the linguistic ambiguities within the UN within the decolonization texts. So I'm trying to, I don't know how the translators can follow me in this because this gets quite intricate here, but the English version of the UN decolonization texts uses the term self-governing territories, right, or non-self-governing territories. In French, they don't literally translate. They don't say les territoires ne se gouvernant par eux-mêmes, which would be the literal translation, but no, they use actually the term autonome. They use the term autonome, or they use the term non-autonome for non-self-governing. And now the French have used in this very ingenious way when they granted their territories limited, that's the focus on it, limited self-government, like a minimum or like a limited level of self-governance, they labeled as autonomie in French. Like they use that same word that the UN legislation uses, or the UN texts use, right? And they have very successfully deceived a lot of people, especially in those territories themselves, who don't speak English, who don't understand these ambiguities, and that I would say rather bad translation or maybe inaccurate translation in the French word, or at least not really equivalent translations between the English UN text and the French UN text. So a lot of people in French Polynesia, I know that from my own interactions, they say, well, yeah, so why are we in French liste des territoires non autonomes when we are actually en territoire autonome, right? Because they, right? Because they follow that French. So that is also, I think, one of we shouldn't underestimate that kind of linguistic, legal linguistic manipulation through legal texts that colonial powers do to invade or trick or deceive a large part of the public in ways to conceal their colonialism. So that would be just my short comment here.
Thank you. I have a short. Thank you very much, Lawrence. I have a short comment. Usually, France, there is no one reason regarding the translation or legal terms and etc. There is one more reason that France usually gives autonomy without any duties. So it's another reason, it's another aspect. And June, please, you have.
Thank you very much for that. I had read that because I could read French also, so I was wondering. I want to start by saying that the illusion of decolonization that Dr. Corbin spoke to and everybody else has had a little say on has provided us with a mirage that there is the end of empire. There is no end of empire. Recently as this year, 2025, both the United Kingdom and France have been on the world stage professing the virtues of empire. and we have to listen to them very carefully. So the British are saying, we have given so much to colonize people that in our countries we should not be speaking, so they're speaking to their nationals, about removing empire. We are a great British empire. That is what they are saying. And you can see it in something that they have articulated as global Britain. So they are trying to, in some ways, although they have not decolonized, they are trying to recolonize some of these countries that have a certain amount of self-determination. So they are trying to rebuild empire. And the same thing for France, because of what has recently happened in Africa with the removal of France. They are saying that, why are you trying to remove France from Africa? We are a great empire, and this is what we have done for you. So we have to carefully look at the reintroduction of empire into our various colonized regions. And this is facilitated by what the professor said about the legal systems. A lot of it is done legally and we don't even realize it. So many of these colonial institutions that were established, whether it is the International Court of Justice, or the financial systems like the IMF, etc., none of these were done with us at the table as colonized people. These institutions were developed for the colonizers. This is how they continue to control us with empire. And so we have to look at these things very carefully. And finally, I want to say that on the other end, we have been talking about colonialism a lot and what colonialism has done. I think that we need to also concentrate a little more on the resistance to colonialism. And from 1900, the Pan-African movement has been at the forefront of calling for decolonization, and we must look at the various attributes of decolonization that they have asked for. And if we do that, I think that we will have an idea of how to move forward and what Baku Initiative should do with regard to decolonization and how we see decolonization and the education around decolonization. I think it is well documented what colonialism is about, but what we have done ourselves, the resistance that we have brought to colonialism is not in the forefront, and we need to do that more.
Thank you, Honorable Dr. Sumer. Yeah, you mentioned about recolonization. I reckon that some colonial powers have imagination that implementation of new colonialism, it's not a neo-colonialism, it's a democratic colonialism. So with our mutual efforts, we will start initial stages of elimination of colonialism. And we have two more remarks, Professor Benafri and Professor Oskaleli. Please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voulais peut-être donner d'autres réflexions sur ce panel de travail. Vous savez tous, on est tous d'accord qu'aujourd'hui, celui qui détient le big data, c'est celui qui détient le pouvoir. Donc, quelle est notre place, nous, les pays du Sud, dans tout ce processus d'information à l'échelle mondiale qui est maîtrisé par les grandes puissances? Donc, on doit peut-être unifier nos efforts, spécialement, comme vous saviez, actuellement, on est en face d'une génération digitale, numérique. Hein? Un jeune, que ce soit en Algérie, au Guadeloupe ou d'autres, il a un téléphone dans sa main pendant 24 heures. Donc, il est temps aussi de travailler sur les méthodes. Comment peut-on utiliser les réseaux sociaux et l'image, et la force de l'image et de l'information pour transmettre ce qu'on veut faire ou ce qu'on veut transmettre à ces générations. Et si vous permettez, je vais vous donner un petit exemple. Et d'ailleurs, mon ami, le professeur Hicham Daoud, il est là pour confirmer cette chose, pour voir comment inconsciemment on est en train d'utiliser des méthodes de l'époque coloniale. Saviez-vous qu'en Algérie, comme en Tunisie, tous les jours, dans les télévisions publiques, on présente les informations de la météo. Une fois que la situation de la météo algérienne est passée, on passe directement à voir ce qui se passe aux États-Unis et en Europe seulement. Nos pays frères de sud subsaharien, c'est un grand vide. Il n'y a que du blanc. Donc, aucune information sur nos pays voisins du Sud. Et ça, quelque part, nous montre pourquoi nous, Algériens ou d'autres, imaginez, on lit la mémoire, les informations sur nos pays frères de Sahara, au Sub-Sahara, à travers le prisme français ou occidental. On n'a jamais une image et une information en live, toujours différées, venues du Paris et d'autres. Donc ça veut dire qu'on continue d'utiliser les mêmes méthodes de la colonisation. On voit l'Afrique à travers les yeux de la France et les yeux de l'Occident. Donc là, c'est une matière de réflexion qu'on doit mettre pour changer la donne, si on veut faire ça. Peut-être à cela, il faut ajouter un point aussi que je trouve important, c'est comment nous, les pays du Sud global, on peut profiter de notre élite, de la diaspora qui est installée dans les pays du Nord. Elle doit aussi être impliquée dans ce changement, dans cette étude, et apporter des solutions à leur pays d'origine. Elle ne peut pas être à l'écart ou seulement être profitable pour les pays d'hier et d'aujourd'hui. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Professor Benafri. After Professor Özkaleli's remarks, we have two interventions from audience. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Now, I would like to, because we are coming to an end, I would like to try to express my thoughts about the agenda for the post-colonial world. I think that the first question that we'll be meeting right now is the situation of the global south in the multipolar world, because most of our experience created in a multipolar world with British and the Dutch, the Spanish, the French colonial era, went through bipolarity, went through unipolarity. Now we are facing a new challenge that is called multipolarity. And as a student of international relations, I would like to kindly remind you a simple fact that usually systemic polarity follows change in military technology. As we had seen, Azerbaijan liberated its long-occupied territories of Karabakh thanks to great leadership, unity, moral and physical unity of its population, faith in justice, but also drone technology. And we also now see that Pakistan had shut down a number of French-made high-tech weapon system. And that suggests that the Western colonial military hegemony, in its own humble ways now, might have been challenged, both at tactical levels and strategic levels. So that is the first question. The second question that had been already raised with artificial intelligence and the virtual space, the colonization, decolonization, or recolonization of the virtual space. Because if you use artificial intelligence, so-called writing assistants, I once caught a student, quote unquote, that the student used artificial intelligence, and the student challenged me, how did I understand? Because we call it Karabakh, not the other names. the artificial intelligence does. Because artificial intelligence just replicates what it is being fed to the systems like Google and whatnot. And when you try to do a Google research on Haiti, Google research on Algeria or Colombia or other countries, what you would be exposed to crime, terror, horror, famine, flood, all kinds of nightmarish stories. That brings me to the next point of the necessity of founding a collective news agency. Still, the information flow is monopolized by few news agencies throughout the world, Reuters, Agence France Presse, and whatnot. And these are always filtering any news that is happening in the world with the colonial gaze. So we must try to challenge that idea. Now, my last but not the least point is about United Nations, because I think that we have devoted considerable time, necessarily so, to the United Nations. I think that Dr. Ben Humphrey has already been, Professor, kindly put it, that there's a vertical and horizontal situations. Now, when we go back to the 1945, 1944, 1943, 45 settings of the United Nations had two fundamental mandates in its origins. The one is the obvious one, preventing a superpower war between USSR and the United States. Less visible, though less important, no less important, is the French and the British colonial interests through the United Nations, as it was already embedded into the UN Charter, because the very wording of self-governance is very important, because having such criteria of statehood, as if that the adulthood is nothing but white man's burden, just inflicted into UN Charter. It itself provides legitimacy to the colonial mentality, not only for legitimizing the past, but also present, and I'm afraid, the future. So we must fight. But here is the dilemma. The moment that we liberate United Nations, the United Nations is going to be seeing it is having its plug pulled. Because as we had seen during the colonial period, when the power shifted from the Security Council to the General Assembly, United Nations was made rather dysfunctional. Similarly, we had seen already in COVID-19 that the United Nations was totally useless. In my very university, His Excellency, Mr. President, at ADA University, he delivered a speech in front of international community of scientists and journalists, and he mentioned an anecdote that was just immediately after the COVID. And he said, and it is kind of, it still gives me the goosebumps, because he said, Azerbaijan has money, and then it was chairing the non-aligned movement. We would like to purchase the vaccine. And Canadians had purchased tremendous amount of it, and they didn't even sell to Azerbaijan so that Azerbaijan could buy it and redistribute it in the global south. And Mr. President explicitly said that unless we save the last person on this earth, we are not going to be able to defeat this virus. Yet the Canadians just ruined the vaccines in their depots. Not my piece of info. That is Mr. President as he delivered. Therefore, I would like to conclude my remarks in this wonderful meeting. I once again thank you and your organization, Mr. Chairman, that we practically are now facing a new global order. Once again, the multipolar order. How we are going to face that? Because in this new multipolar order, the United Nations may demise. Are we going to just keep playing with the colonial rules, as once Bell Hooks, I believe, put it, you cannot dismantle the colonial house with their own tools. That is, we should never forget that very strong wisdom. I think, in my humble opinion, I'm kind of a junior faculty member at ADA University, but you are representing a great sources of power. So my humble suggestion, a kind request from you distinguished members of this very important gathering, is that perhaps we can work on creating universities, post-colonial departments, even ministries and secretariats under the Ministries of Foreign Affairs about post-colonial affairs. We should never forget that it is the collective effort that the French and the British were fighting against each other while their colonial offices were very much in cooperation everywhere. So practically any time that we need a collaboration, we need offices that are in touch, in a network, all the time. One very last point. Our esteemed colleague mentioned the French and the English translation of a very important article of the UN Charter. I started from psychoanalysis, and let me end up with psychoanalysis, also invoking almost each and every one of us already mentioned the methodology of fighting against colonial yoke. Freud pays particular attention to what he calls parapraxis, that's the slip of a tongue. When you see such contradictions in the texts, that is what I would call a colonial parapraxis. This is a crack between the French and the British mentality that they otherwise collaborate all the time. Therefore, that could give us a humble yet very effective psychoanalytical tool, methodological tool to fight back, that we should get into the same text with their French and English translations and see where they're in conflict, because that is where we can make that crack on which the colonial yoke collapses. Thank you very much.
Dear Professor, I extend my gratitude for such professional clarification of decolonization matters. Thanks again. Dear participants, we have some interventions, some questions from the audience. I would like to give the floor to Ms. Günel Garayeva, Ms. Vasila Ibadli from the University of Language, Azerbaijan University of Language, and the third intervention by Ikhtiyar Mahmudzadeh from the Academy of Public Administration under the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan. We are ready for your questions, feedbacks, comments, please.
Thank you for this opportunity. The key moment, the key side, effective side for me was that colonization kills the national identity, the sense of the possession to native nation, the national consciousness. Let me to call this process the national vacuumization. And please let me define the new trends, new strategies, new philosophy of France colonial administration as a manipulator in ethnic, religious, linguistic, even tribal division in Africa and the Middle East.
Okay, thank you all, our honorable speakers, one more time, for all the insights you shared with us today. And in my opinion, you have already highlighted all the important points of this topic. But I have another two questions. They are kind of linked to each other. First of all, what are the long-term psychological effects of assimilation policy on individuals and communities in former French colonies and overseas territories? And the second question is that, what do you think, what role international organizations like UN and initiatives like Baku Initiative Group can play or should play to encourage former colonial powers to go beyond political dimensions of decolonization and genuinely, let's say, address the deep cultural and psychological roots of their colonial legacy. In other words, how can we sure that decolonization is not just symbolic, but also transformative at the level of identity, memory, or justice? Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, ladies, for your questions. Just short, brief comment regarding the, first we have to differ intergovernmental organizations and Baku Initiative Group because we are representative of civil society organizations. The role of intergovernmental organizations so huge, but it could be compared by our doctors and professors, who is more effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these two wonderful questions. Let me start with killing an identity. When I was younger, there was this very famous movie came out, rather violent, but otherwise worth watching in my humble opinion, V for Vendetta. And there's this cliche came out from the movie that the ideas cannot be killed, identities cannot be killed. I think that they are alive in oral history, they are everywhere, though it doesn't really change the fact that colonialism really indeed tries to kill the national identity. The psychological effects of colonization, I believe Frantz Fanon already made it quite evident with his experience, and if you follow the sequence of his writings, you would immediately realize that the first book had a quite different experiential mentality than the subsequent books, and he eventually realized that the individual level of psychoanalytical repression cannot explain the situation of especially the colonized man, which would return. I can also invoke the great Brazilian pedagogue Freire and the pedagogy of the oppressed, that we usually are taught to reflect and project our own repression to other entities. Sometimes this is the children and the wives at home, and the other groups, animals, that we think that are easier targets. When I was young, the main secular slogan in Turkey was not going to be like Algeria. Little did I know about it. What a shame how colonial psyche manipulates our unconscious. I wish to be like Algeria, because what they were saying that then Algeria was getting into Sharia and so on and so forth. But what they made us memorize instead, that we should not really be like Algeria. Why? Because Algerians are resilient. Because Algerians know how to fight for their independence. So that is unfortunately how the colonizer works. And let me just, I don't want to consume too much of time, but these questions are wonderful. There's this movie came up in Turkey a few years ago, totally trivial and bogus movie called Recep İvedik. And they put a scene there, I don't know if you had a chance, that this Turkish guy in a boxing match hits an Azerbaijani boxer. Now, this is what the Lacanian psychoanalytic film theory would call the female gaze. It is like the scene had nothing to do with the plot, which is absent anyhow. But that was just an addition to manipulate, creating a rift between two brothers and sisters. And this is how colonialism unfortunately functions, that it is in between lines. It is in your social media. It is in the pictures. Before you realize it, you are already mesmerized by its effect. Now, very quickly, moving to the next question, the role of the United Nations and the international organization, if they can, or the NGOs, if they can really do anything with the Western colonial mind. Let me just quickly remind you the very distinction, the Machiavellian distinction between virtu and virtue. Machiavelli argues that the virtue, which is very important for the individual person, virtue's personality, cannot be adopted by the prince. The prince must act with virtue, which is, in translation, means manliness. So practically, the colonial mind, I know because I am a product of theirs. I was trained by them. I exactly know how they think, all right? So one of the first things that whenever you try to worry about the colonized, the history, what happened to very famous freedom fighter, a female Algerian, got captured and photographed and killed. The moment that you show mercy, they come and remind you virtue. You gotta act like a man. That means that is your colonial soul should act national interest defined in terms of power. So practically, unfortunately, that's a whole education system, like a machinery, produces and reproduces individuals that are the cogs in the colonial machine. What I am afraid is our contribution without realizing into this cog of the machine. Because let's face it, when I entered the university, my very beloved ADA University, there are a lot of internalized colonized people. They just even do not realize that they are reproducing the colonial mentality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for such comprehensive replies. And Ms. Vasily Badli, as I remember, she mentioned about the psychology factor of assimilation. Yeah? Regarding psychological impact of assimilation, I have to underline that assimilation policy has impressive consequences. I mean, negatively impressive consequences, because indigenous people could forget their traditions, culture, language. For example, I discussed these issues with my colleagues from Guadeloupe, and unfortunately, the majority of youth, they forget about traditions of and culture of Guadeloupe. They feel as French, as a citizen of France. That's why it's a huge negative impact on psychology of people. Thank you for your questions. And dear speakers, we have 4 more questions from the Academy of Public Administration under the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan. You guys, you can ask one by one. İhtiyar Mahmudzadeh, Nigar Gözalova, Günel Efendiyeva, and Aysan Mammadova.
Salam, hər vaxtınız xeyir olsun. Mən İxtiyar Mahmudzadə, Azərbaycan Respublikasının Prezidenti yanında Dövlət Dərsilik Akademiyası Tələbə Gənclər Təşkilatının sədri. Bildiyimiz kimi biz tarixə nəzər salsaq, müəyyən dövlətlər tərəfindən siyasi və iqtisadi cəhətdən inkişaf eləmiş həmin dövlətlər tərəfindən müstəmləkə siyasət həyata keçirilir və bu siyasət nəticəsində həmin ərazidə yaşayan xalqların hüquqları pozulub və eyni zamanda onlar təsir altında qalıblar. Mənim sualım ondan ibarətdir ki, gələcəkdə həmin dövlətlər tərəfindən yürüdülən müstəmləkəçilik siyasəti göz önünə hansı təhlükələri qoyur? Çox sağ olun, təşəkkür edirəm.
Dear participants and distinguished guests, first of all, I would love to thank you for providing comprehensive insights on the topics. My question, just like my concern, it's more ecological, And as we know, last year, Azerbaijan hosted COP29. And one of the issues, one of the crucial issues was the environmental challenges faced by former colonial countries. And just very similar to our ecological situation in our liberated territories. And also the main strives, they were done for finding most effective ways for ecological reanimation. So can we nowadays, like after several months or 8 months after COP29, can we say that the world's focus is on these problems, like on the ecological situation in these former colonial countries? And can we speak about any progress in this respect? Thank you very much for your attention.
Günel Efendiyeva. I welcome all participants. As historians, I was interested decolonization, and my question about decolonization that please analyze the major similarities and differences that characterize the decolonization processes of British India, French Algeria, Belgian Congo, and Portuguese Angola. Then examine how these initial differences influenced their respective post-independence development trajectories. Thank you.
I'm happy to greet all of you. Thank you for your all meaningful presentation. And my question is, considering the deep dependence of many Caribbean countries of mass tourism, which is often seen as a continuation of colonial economic models, what specific mechanism or innovative approach do you envision for creating more equitable tourism economies that benefit local populations, lowering for dependence for it? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions and feedbacks. Distinguished speakers, are you ready?
Yeah, I am ready.
Please.
Thank you very much, because I think the last question I can answer first. With regard to the dependency on tourism and the impact that we can have on the local communities. One of the first things you must realize about colonialism in the Caribbean is that it thrived on a plantation system. So with the demise of traditional crops, whether it was sugarcane or bananas, etc., countries had to find another way to earn foreign exchange and to be integrated into the global market. And so they turned to tourism. But in my own assessment, tourism is just another plantation system. That's my first very controversial statement. Because what tourism has done is to consolidate power in the hands of a reimagined planter class. So the people who traditionally owned these plantations on which they enslaved us have now converted that money into tourism and have given access to even a broader number of investors. So there's a statement about be careful about colonists, because they will come back to your country as investors. That is a very true statement. And so what they have done now is, before the plantations were more in the rural areas. So they have left these rural areas very devastated. maybe because of the use of pesticides that now cause cancers in our countries, or because they have left their land barren, so we cannot grow food. And so we now move to the urban areas where we get menial jobs in the tourist industry. So how do we then break that cycle? And how do we make people more, because at least on the plantation system, especially in the banana plantation system in later years, some local people had access to economy. But on the tourism, that has been taken away from them. And so there have been a number of strategies that are being used in our countries to look at how we can give access back to the people of the country. And one of the areas is to look at new industries. So we look at diversification of the economy so we don't depend so much on tourism. And another thing we have done is to do like a farm-to-table kind of experience in tourism so that the people who grow the food, who are the people in the rural areas, can now sell this food to the hotels, etc., to make sure that they get some income. But it's a very hard thing to do to break colonial ownership, because the people who own the hotels, as I said, are the same people who own the plantations. So it has been a very difficult thing to do, because they will tell you that the tourists prefer to eat the food from where they come from. So German tourists would prefer to come to our hotels and eat German food than to eat the food that we grow, because they have so denigrated our local cuisine. So when you look at the culture area, it also extends to the food we eat. And so that is a very important issue. And the other thing that we recognize about tourism is that it has reinforced some global colonialism initiatives. And one of these initiatives is air access. So it is very difficult, for example, for a tourist from the Caribbean, although we are not seen as tourists because we live in paradise, the people from the Caribbean to go to Africa, because the colonizers own the travel routes. So I must fly either to the United States or to the United Kingdom and spend 24 hours traveling to or more to come to Azerbaijan, when a more direct route will not take me more than 5 hours. So they have made it extremely difficult for us also to control air routes and make the linkages very quickly. So that the South-South cooperation that we speak to is also hindered by air access. We cannot reach each other quickly. And so that is a challenge for us. And with regard to and I wanted to comment on the last question before these four. And I want to just leave you with part of a song from Bob Marley. And I urge you to go and look at some of the Caribbean resistance songs. And Bob Marley says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And we have to take note of the fact that the onus is on us. Because, as we heard, the decolonizers, the masters will never dismantle their house. We are the ones who are supposed to do this ourselves. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Martinez, please.
Gracias. Yo quiero reaccionar con respecto a la pregunta referida a la cuestión ecológica, a la COP29, también con respecto a la trayectoria de los países coloniales y los efectos sobre las personas, los efectos psicológicos de la colonización. En lo que hace a la cuestión ecológica, y felicito a Azerbaiyán por haber albergado la COP29, creo que estamos en un momento crítico para, digamos, construir una narrativa más equitativa sobre el rol de los diferentes pueblos en la conservación de la naturaleza y sus contribuciones a la sostenibilidad del planeta. Hay una conciencia colectiva global, por ejemplo, de la importancia de la Amazonía, pero hoy se desconoce que Brasil, por ejemplo, alberga alrededor del 65% del territorio amazónico y que de esa franja territorial el 32% está habitado por afrodescendientes, por pueblos quilombolas, que poseen el 35% de la biodiversidad de Brasil como país megadiverso. Entonces, reconocer el rol de estos pueblos es de la mayor importancia. En Colombia, por ejemplo, mi país, que alberga el 10% de la biodiversidad del planeta, gran parte de esos recursos de la biodiversidad se encuentran localizados en pueblos afrodescendientes y, por supuesto, pueblos indígenas. De manera que este reconocimiento del rol de estos pueblos, que además históricamente han sido víctimas del colonialismo y la esclavización, digamos, la necesidad de mirar todos estos elementos en contextos y generar una narrativa más equitativa hace parte de los desafíos. En Colombia dimos un paso importante en la conferencia, la COP16, y la embajadora Jung estuvo allá, la COP de los pueblos, donde por primera vez pueblos afrodescendientes, la cuestión de los afrodescendientes fue abordada en la COP16 y estamos en este momento camino a la COP30 en Brasil, con la pretensión de que se pueda dar un salto y que en la conversación en esta materia. De modo que este rol de estos pueblos para la sostenibilidad del planeta y la necesidad de abordarlo en un contexto con una perspectiva histórica por los impactos sociales, psicológicos y demás, los traumas intergeneracionales que aún poseen, pero que hacen parte pues, de los desafíos para abordar estas cuestiones, tiene la mayor vigencia y agradezco que haya sido traído a la mesa esta conversación. La segunda cuestión tiene que ver con la referencia a las trayectorias de los países postcoloniales y a ese respecto quiero reiterar que la cuestión de Haití, ¿sí?, es emblemática en esta conversación. Es decir, si hay un pueblo que hoy evidencia las implicaciones del colonialismo y del rol de los imperios, ¿sí?, es Haití, digamos. La situación que vive Haití actualmente está íntimamente relacionada con la dificultad que tuvo para estructurarse, la desestructuración de esta nación en virtud de la imposición de Francia en su momento, de esta, comillas, deuda de 150 millones de francos, explica la situación actual de Haití. Y en ese sentido, es importante, digamos, considerar que este es apenas un referente de los impactos del colonialismo y la esclavización. De allí que hoy la agenda de los afrodescendientes tenga como un punto central la cuestión de la reparación, el derecho a la reparación histórica, reparación moral, reparación material, reparación espiritual. Desde el Foro Permanente sobre los Afrodescendientes hemos identificado un conjunto de acciones que incluyen la necesidad de establecer una comisión legal que examine, ¿sí?, a fondo todas estas cuestiones, la necesidad de que en instancias como el Consejo de Derechos Humanos se pueda establecer algún mecanismo de asesoría, una comisión que se ocupe de la cuestión de las reparaciones históricas en favor de los afrodescendientes, e incluso en la perspectiva de la posibilidad de que se pueda establecer un tribunal internacional sobre reparación histórica de los afrodescendientes. Estamos examinando igualmente la necesidad de que las cortes regionales adopten, digamos, o se pronuncien de manera consultiva, digamos, solicitudes de opiniones consultivas a la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, por ejemplo, en el caso de las Américas, Corte Europea de Derechos Humanos, Corte Africana de Derechos Humanos, y los pueblos puedan pronunciarse de manera consultiva sobre la responsabilidad de los estados en la trata transatlántica, la esclavización y la prolongación de sus consecuencias. Finalmente, quiero señalar que en esta discusión en torno a la cuestión de las reparaciones hay una serie de obstáculos, digamos, que hemos identificado y que están sobre la mesa hoy, que incluyen la necesidad de una narrativa equitativa que ponga sobre la superficie el impacto, el rol de la trata transatlántica y la esclavización en el sistema económico actual, en la estructura. No hay un reconocimiento real sobre cómo toda la estructura del sistema económico actual está de una u otra forma edificado sobre la trata transatlántica y la esclavización. Necesitamos igualmente, y estamos interpelados a generar una narrativa que revierta o que cuestione la valoración según la cual la esclavitud era legal en su momento y en consecuencia por eso no hay razón para responder, es decir, estaba revestida de legalidad. Entonces, moralmente inaceptable que alguien hoy, un país hoy, presente como argumento el carácter legal de esta abominable práctica en el pasado. Asimismo, se hace necesario revisar el argumento de beneficiarios de la trata transatlántica y la esclavización que argumentan una cierta ruptura intergeneracional, porque dicen que los descendientes de los victimarios no pueden responder por lo que hicieron sus antepasados, pero se están usufructuando de esos beneficios. Incluso un país como España, que reivindica tesoros como un galeón San José, que fue identificado por Colombia con grandes riquezas de oro y plata, hoy dicen que eso les pertenece, pero no se han dignado siquiera pedir perdón por su rol en la trata transatlántica y la esclavización, es decir, esa doble moral, ¿sí? Entonces, en suma, en resumen, lo que se constata, y en eso comparto con el secretario general de las Naciones Unidas, que los beneficiarios de la trata transatlántica y la esclavización no han tenido la voluntad política ni el coraje moral para responder por su rol en estas cuestiones. Esta conversación es muy vigente porque cuando analizamos la situación del colonialismo, ¿sí?, y las nuevas corrientes políticas que cada vez más conspiran en contra de todo lo que signifique diversidad, es decir, el auge, el resurgimiento del racismo y del fascismo. Si no hay una respuesta frente a los hechos del pasado, es imposible que podamos entender y abordar el contexto que nos ocupa. Ojalá que países como Azerbaiyán pudieran abocarse, por ejemplo, a acompañar la iniciativa de una conferencia internacional sobre las cuestiones de los afrodescendientes en el marco de este segundo decenio internacional de los afrodescendientes, porque sería una oportunidad para profundizar en torno a estas y otras cuestiones. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, dear Ambassador. I totally agree with Ambassador's views that one of the main consequences of colonial and neo-colonial policies are environmental damages. And in addition, Madame mentioned about the COP29 events. I would like to point out that Baku Initiative Group conducted more than 5 international conferences during COP29 in Blue Zone and in Green Zone. These events dedicated to environmental issues in former colonies such as Mali, Niger, and Kenya. And also there are dedicated some events to New Caledonia, Guadeloupe, and Martinique. And for next reply, Mr. Corbin, and after, Mr. Dawood and Professor Menafre. Okay, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pardon. I want to make reference to the issue of ecology, and there's a direct link between ecology and colonialism, and it has a lot to do with the issue of militarization. In many of the territories, you find that the colonial power has utilized significant parts of that territory for military purposes, including bases, including testing. We know, of course, of the issues in Algeria with the nuclear terrorism, as we have reframed it, as well as in Maui Nui, French Polynesia, with respect to that. But we also have situations of bases which have been placed in territories such as Bermuda, for example, which were left without any indication of a cleanup. So pristine areas throughout the territory having, in fact, one colonial power leasing a part of the island to another colonial power, which then creates a base which uses the base for its military purposes, leaving the base ultimately with no agreement or no commitment to cleanup. And with that cleanup is quite substantial, quite expensive, and it certainly is something which the territory was not responsible for. So this is something which replicates in a number of territories globally. So it's just a point that the extent to which colonies move to full self-government through independence, in this case, would permit those territories, if they are to have some degree of military presence of a third country or of a larger country, which may wish to retain such we look at the Philippines, for example, after independence. There was a different type of military arrangement, although that has now deteriorated. But certainly the issue of having an agreement with respect to military presence, because in fact we're dealing with what exists. So therefore, if we're moving to the next level, we have to recognize what exists. So then we must determine, and any agreements that come later would have a mandatory requirement for a commitment to clean up any sort of degradation that may take place. Again, this is something that is recognized, in fact, in United Nations General Assembly resolutions regularly since the 1990s, relating to the use of colonial territories for military purposes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Je voudrais répondre à la question concernant le souci écologique. Je pense que ça fait quelques années, l'Union européenne a voté pour une loi pour des taxes concernant la pollution. Et dans cette résolution de l'Union européenne, ils ont considéré le gaz naturel comme étant une source de transition, c'est-à-dire une source énergétique de transition pour aller aux énergies propres. Cette résolution qui a été adoptée par l'Union européenne a poussé les bateaux qui viennent vers l'Europe, qui doivent payer des taxes. Donc ils utilisent des ports comme le port de Tanger du Maroc, qui est un grand port, afin d'éviter de payer des taxes. Et le transport de gaz, il pose aussi un problème entre les pays du Nord et les pays du Sud. Parce que, par exemple, les États-Unis, qui ont alimenté une grande partie de l'Europe du gaz pendant cette crise entre la Russie et l'Ukraine, ils utilisent la technique du GNL pour transporter le gaz au plus loin possible. Cette technique elle n'est pas assez utilisée par les pays du Sud pour pouvoir sortir du marché régional vers un marché plus global. Et les États-Unis, elle a fait payer beaucoup de pays européens plus d'argent concernant cette transportation avec le GNL. L'Algérie, qui possède un grand potentiel de gaz de schiste, il y avait un projet de développer le gaz de schiste, mais avec quelques interventions de sociétés françaises qui ne voulaient pas aller vers le développement de gaz de schiste, ça a vraiment coincé ce projet qui pourrait être énorme. Les médias français, ils ont évoqué quelques problèmes pour ne pas entamer le gaz de schiste, même si aux États-Unis, il a eu la réussite de ce projet, parce que les médias français, par méconnaissance du sujet, je pense, donc ils évoquent la question de on va employer beaucoup d'eau, on doit créer des puits de gaz de schiste chaque 6 mois, ce qui va consommer beaucoup de puits. Et jusqu'à maintenant, il n'y a pas un vrai décollage du gaz de schiste en Algérie, même si que le président de la République, M. Tebboune, il a annoncé un grand projet dans le sud-ouest algérien, spécifiquement dans la région de Rardjbilat, là à côté de Tindouf, là où il y a vraiment un réservoir énorme, très grand réservoir de gaz, et qui va, avec un chemin de train, il va transporter le gaz de Rardjbilat au sud jusqu'à Oran au nord, et ça va aller jusqu'en Europe. L'année dernière, l'Algérie a voté pour une nouvelle loi d'investissement. Cette nouvelle loi d'investissement aide les gens à venir investir en Algérie. Et la nouveauté de cette loi, c'est que l'Algérie a décidé de supprimer la règle de 51-49 concernant quelques secteurs qui ne sont pas stratégiques. Elle a gardé la règle de 51-49 concernant les secteurs stratégiques comme le pétrole, la pharmacie, etc. Mais ça a ouvert vraiment pour la diversité des acteurs pour sortir de cette dépendance juste avec les sociétés françaises. Donc cette loi d'investissement servait que l'Algérie voulait ouvrir le marché vers d'autres acteurs et ne pas rester juste avec une coopération unique avec la France. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Si vous permettez, j'ai 2 points à dire dans ce panel. En réalité, en écoutant mes collègues ici présents, je constate qu'à la fin de compte, les empires coloniaux ont une grande responsabilité dans la modification des structures sociales et géographiques, spécialement pour les pays africains, l'époque de l'esclavage, éparpillés comme des parties des puzzles en Amérique latine, et qui, normalement, on devait demander le rendement de compte. Comment peut-on récupérer la mémoire de ces tribus, de ces nations qui ont été éparpillées dans le monde sans savoir de quelle origine sont. Et cela me fait rappeler peut-être le film de Amistad, que vous connaissez sans doute, qui a été réalisé par Spielberg, qui raconte justement cette problématique des tribus africaines qui se retrouvent aux États-Unis et par la suite revenir cherchant l'identité et les noms de ces gens-là, qui quelque part montre le marasme et la profondeur de cet effet colonial sur ces peuples africains. Le deuxième point que je trouve aussi important, je pense que nous, les pays du Sud, nous pouvons unir nos efforts dans les institutions internationales pour réclamer la restitution de notre patrimoine culturel confisqué et présenté dans les musées des pays coloniaux, comme l'Espagne, le Portugal, la France et la Grande-Bretagne. Je pense qu'il y a là un champ de travail qu'on doit travailler ensemble pour récupérer les biens culturels de nos pays déjà confisqués d'une manière illégale dans ces pays coloniaux. Merci infiniment.
Dear speakers, do you have any additional comments, feedbacks? Please, June.
And I will make this my last comment, so I will say my thank you also. With regard to the ecological question, one of the things we have not mentioned at all is the transshipment of nuclear waste through the Caribbean Sea from Europe to Japan. And although the Caribbean has objected to it at the level of the United Nations, it still continues today. So we don't know what is in the containers that's passing through our waters. We don't know what will happen if there's an accident. And neither do we have access to the narrative on the passing of nuclear waste through our waters, because we are not, although we speak to it, we are ignored. I want to say that what the last comment by the professor and one of the comments by Pastor points us to the reparations, the CARICOM 10-point reparations plan. CARICOM has a 10-point reparations plan, which includes, first of all, an apology from European nations for enslavement. And we use the term enslavement and not slavery. Enslavement and native genocide. So our plan includes the apology. It includes a development program for the indigenous people, because the indigenous people, there's a myth that they were obliterated, so they live in plain sight and people ignore them. So we want an indigenous plan. We want repatriation of these cultural artifacts. We want repatriation of people of African descent who want to return to Africa to resettle. We also want funding for the health crisis that we spoke to, for education, also for cultural development and etc. So there is a comprehensive, as well as debt relief, because we had to borrow money on the international, in the international arena from institutions that charge people in countries of Africa and African descent higher interest rates than they charge Europeans, for example, from borrowing from them. Although it's our money, because of our resources and the fact that we were the ones at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. So it is our money, really and truly, that they are lending back to us. We have to keep our money, for example, African countries, in French banks and pay interest rates if we want the money. We speak to the issue of Haiti also, and we talk about the 50 million francs. But I want people to know that it is 15 million gold francs. It's not just the francs that you see now. It is gold that we're speaking about that has devastated Haiti and kept it in poverty and underdevelopment. So we are asking for restitution for that money for Haiti, a special program for Haiti, as well as the reparatory justice issues that I have spoken to. And I think that the Baku Initiative and the Permanent Forum can have discussions on a lot of these issues that are very similar, because we look at decolonization within the Permanent Forum also, as well as the University of the West Indies, which has an extensive program on decolonization that we can also examine. And I think that once we come together globally, unity, we have been talking about unity. Yes, there are challenges to unity, including proximity, but I think that we can use the technology that is available for us to be able to continue with these discussions and to implement a plan that will evolve. It will not always be successful, but this is not a job for the faint-hearted. Decolonization is not a job for the faint-hearted. It is something that we have to keep at, and so we look forward to the unity that will get us there. I thank you so much.
Distinguished guests, I would like to just use this opportunity to thank you, each and every one of you, along with our participants and the attendees. One last point that I would like to raise as a concluding remark, at least on my part, with your permission, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman. I think that we have come to a point that the post-colonial consciousness has developed to the degree that now we are putting a good deal of resistance. But it was the Italian Communist Party leader Antonio Gramsci realized that how adaptable the capitalist mode of production is, especially through the concept of hegemony, that is the combination of state and the civil society. It is my humble observation through my research, now we are facing, as the students of post-colonial research or the practitioners of anti-colonialism in diplomacy, in politics, in elsewhere, that now post-colonial idea has become a product itself in the Western institutions. What I mean by product is that it is something that is being bought and sold. It is like democracy. Now, the danger of turning post-colonial idea into a product, from fight for freedom, from quest for justice, it is to commodify it. And I think that that is the most visible when it comes to ecology. On the one hand, as our distinguished esteemed friends and colleagues have already raised, that colonization created an ecological wreckage throughout the world, from Fiji to Algeria to Amazon to elsewhere in many places in Africa. But when it comes to intellectual debates, even United Nations organizations up until the COP29, I'm afraid to say, that the ecology was once again weaponized, not to admit the guilt, but put down those who are trying to develop, those who are trying to use their own natural gas, trying to extract natural resources, very important rare earth that is fueling artificial intelligence and whatnot. Therefore, I think that one of the most crucial issues that we have to tackle with is the decommodification of the very idea of post-colonial search for freedom. Thank you very much.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to also make kind of a more like a final note that goes more on the intellectual level. I guess it came out of a idea that I had early this morning to Murat's presentation when he mentioned the French Revolution. And it made me think about kind of something deeper here, namely that we should also not be afraid to decolonize Europe, the European Enlightenment. And I mean the Enlightenment itself, because where did it actually come from? Like, we associate it with the French Revolution and the American Revolution. But the European idea of democracy doesn't come from either of those two. It comes from another colonized European country, namely Corsica, right? I mean, if some of these Corsican leaders who have been here may have shared that with you before, that the first European-style liberal democracy existed neither in the US, because there was slavery, nor in France, but it existed in Corsica when there was in the 1750s, when there was a small island nation that had the right of vote for everybody, universal suffrage, including women, including Jews, including Muslims. Like, this was the most advanced European nation you could imagine in the 1700s. And then France invaded it and occupied it, and we are still here, and they're still fighting after 250 years for their independence, right? So I think we need to also always be aware when we talk about these European ideas of enlightenment and democracy that they were actually stolen from a small European nation fighting for its freedom, and they were stolen by these and hijacked by these imperial powers, the US and France and later others, to put them in the service of their imperialism and imposing Western notions of democracy and blah and whatever on the rest of the world, rather than actually looking at the origins of where these kind of Enlightenment ideas were first employed in a positive sense of a small island country running itself. So just wanted to link that up with Corsica, that is I know also dear to the BIG's heart to support that. So
just a quick addition, if I may, there. Now, one of the most important works, at least at intellectual level, for post-colonial studies is Provincializing Europe, of course, right? And I just would like to reiterate that the European story or history is not the story. It is not the story of the world. It is at best a story, one part of the world. So I think that we need to reclaim the pluralistic understanding of multiplicity of stories, because mirror always has two faces. There is a colonizer's history and there is the other's history. Now, it is what I humbly call the alternative, by using both the alter and emphasizing the native by using a coinage in that. So I humbly suggest to work more on the alternative histories. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I think we completed with all conclusion remarks. Dear, with your consent, dear distinguished professors, doctors, I would like to conclude our today's International Scientific Conference. Dear distinguished participants, media representatives, please accept my heartfelt thanks for your contribution, for exchange of knowledge, exchange of experience. Today we had fascinating presentations. We listened insightful speeches, outstanding observations, exceptional insights, brilliant remarks. Hope we will organize such scientific events, scientific conferences in decolonized in decolonized territories. Thank you again for your commitment to decolonization, and we can make a group photo. Thank you very much.